Hello and welcome to the webinar, 2023 Strategies for HR to Create a Phenomenal Employee Experience and Future-Proof Your Company. My name is Michael with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then we'll dive into our presentation. First, we'd like to thank WorkTango for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to WorkTango. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. And for those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. I also want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rob Catalino, Chief Engagement Officer with WorkTango. Rob, we're so happy to have you with us here today. Thank you. Welcome, and over to you.
Awesome, Michael. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Hope you're all doing well. I'm excited to be here today from my office / gym / second room here in Toronto in a condo downtown. Again, I've done some work with Argyle over the past decade or so, and it's always great to partner and basically, bring people together in terms of inspiration and education and bringing these types of conversations together. So I'm very excited to be here. Just a little more from an introduction from my end, I have been spending the last 18 years in the world of building HR technology companies, advising organizations on building better employee experiences, and I'm just passionate about it. I co-founded a company called WorkTango about 7-8 years ago, building technology when it comes to helping with listening to your employees, rewarding and recognizing great behaviors, managing performance in a new way. I've started another company called Innovate Work, focusing on bringing HR people together to build best practices and inspiration. And it's just something that I love to do. It's something that I think I call it my passion statement to improve work lives, as a way that, we spend a lot of our waking time at work. How do we make sure that's a great experience at the end of the day? So I'm excited. Love to see some people already in from New York, and let me know where you're in from today. Hopefully there's a good array of people around. So now, I mentioned I'm really passionate about this world of building better workplaces, but I actually am also passionate about music. I'm a failed musician, used to play guitar in metal bands back in the day, and I always like to infuse my passion for music into my chats as well. So to set us up to talk today, I want to start with a little bit of a story before we get into the main content. So here it is. Now, these 4 people that you see on the screen have something in common. Now, you probably recognize them as being famous musicians, but they have something more in common than just being famous musicians. Now, one thing you're probably thinking that I always think when I see this is that Steven Tyler looks like John Travolta in Grease, and he does. You're right. I think the same thing. But beyond being famous musicians, these individuals have the record in the recording studio for 6 octaves when it comes to their voice. And that's impressive if you know anything about music. Now, that being said, you know these people, right? They're famous musicians, famous celebrities. But I bet you don't know who this person is. And this is Tim Storms. He actually holds the Guinness record for the widest vocal range at 10 octaves, right? He crushes them all. I know what you're thinking. What the heck does this have to do with HR, right? And best practices and strategies for next year building a better employee experience or future-proofing our company? Well, when it comes to comparisons, I like to bring up 2. First is that I feel that Tim Storms is the modern day HR leader or HR executive, right? Impressive talent, right? More qualified to make company-wide impactful decisions, but does it under the radar, right? And just like HR executives, super impressive pedigrees and should be celebrated just like Tim Storms, but we don't get that recognition at the end of the day. And again, I think things are starting to change in that world we'll get to, but that's one thing I think about when I look at this story about Tim Storms versus these celebrities. Now, that all being said, the second major thing that comes to mind to me is that companies are so stuck in what they know and what they've done in the past that they don't change, right? They can't convince themselves or other executives in the organization. And I find HR making changes in their company is a huge struggle. Now, I don't know about you, when it comes to music, it's okay to do the same thing you've been doing for many years, right? And not change your preferences. But from an HR perspective, we have to change our approaches to building a better experience. Case in point, I've been listening to the same Metallica and CNC Music Factory cassette tapes since, I won't even tell you since when, I'm probably aging myself. I'm not embarrassed by it at all. I just went to a Metallica concert recently. I'm actually wearing socks that are Metallica. Love it. I'm kind of embarrassed about the CNC Music Factory part of it, not going to lie. But listen to "Gonna Make You Sweat" and you make your own decision on that. But the reason why I'm telling these stories about the HR executive, changing our practices, is the main theme of this story I really wanted to tell today was the fact that problems are durable and solutions change. So think about everything happening around us in our organization, everything changing from an HR perspective. We will always be hard pressed, no matter it's in these times or past times or in future times, to recruit, retain, and inspire our talent. Right? Those problems will always be there, but the way that we approach fixing that problem or finding a solution has to change. It has to change with the changing workplace that's around us, the changing employee expectations. So I tell this story to set up what I really want to talk about today is that, one, why new HR strategies are required in today's changing workplace. We'll kind of set the stage with that and then dive into the major part of the conversation today, right? 6 key strategies to focus on in 2023, and in my opinion, to future-proof your company moving forward. Third, it's just a framework to set you up for success, right? I always like to leave with something prescriptive that you can take with you, your team, to really make that change in your organization. And lastly, just some final mindsets that I'd like to kind of part people on. And my goal here is I've spent almost 2 decades working with organizations to build better cultures, better employee experiences, better businesses with an HR and people's lens. And my goal is to bring a wisdom of crowds approach of all that I've learned and seen to be able to share that with you all today. Now, before I dive into these items, there's one slide and one question I ask every time I speak, whether it's in person or in a webinar like this. And the question is, who cares? By the way, if you look up "who cares" in Google, this actually shows up. It's probably the coolest thing that Google does. I'm very impressed by that technology. But I want to just level set. Maybe you're not a big believer that you have to change your HR practices, right? Maybe you don't think that we have to adjust the way that we're doing things based on a modern workplace and a modern employee. So I wanted to just level set in terms of why we should care about this topic today. And based on everyone that's here, I'm hoping that people are really tuned in and caring about this topic. So first thing I want to mention is one reason why we should care is that we are in the biggest wave of organizations that we've seen for decades. And what I mean by that is if you look at these images on the screen, right? About 30, 40 years ago, we were in a world of what I call supplier relationship management, right? Let's call it SRM. How do we know who our suppliers are? How do we build better relationships with them? How do we have more data for better pricing? How do we ship our products or build our widgets in a way that's going to drive success of our overall organization? We spend so much time and effort and energy and technology building a better supplier relationship management. And then you think about 20, 30 years ago, it switched not from suppliers, but to customers, like customer relationship management. How do we understand our customers, predict what they're going to do, listen to them? Again, get all the data we can to build better customer relationships because we knew that was a driving force in our organization. Invest time, effort, dollars, money, technology. And then you saw about 15 years ago, it switched to something I call PRM, right? Prospect relationship management. How do we know our customers before they're customers, right? How do we understand them? How do we have all the data on them, the technology, et cetera? And the biggest shift we're seeing on the last side is what I call ERM, employee relationship management. Organizations are understanding that this investment of time, technology, information and data is really important to leverage our biggest asset in our organization, not our suppliers and our customers and our prospects, but our employees at the end of the day. And this shift is happening right now, and we have to be honest to ourselves that this new wave has to change how we run or manage our businesses. And if you don't believe that this shift is happening, again, another reason why you should care is even if you just look at the last 5 years of HR tech venture funding, you see a huge, huge thing that's happening here. And the numbers you're seeing on the screen, the line is the number of deals, the boxes are the number of dollars invested in HR technology. And aside from this little pandemic thing that happened in 2020, these numbers are continuing to go up. So Again, what's even more interesting about this is these 5 years are more than the last 20 years combined. So the effort, the time, the dollars being spent on improving technologies is changing, right? So we have to be on that wave. Now, another reason why you should care, maybe it's not just about the business and the technology and growing the organization, but you should care when you think about your own role as HR leaders, right? The types of people, jobs, and skills are changing, not just in our company, but for our very own HR profession. Right? This screen here from Harvard shows the anticipated role evolution of HR. And you're seeing things like here that you've probably not even heard of: chief purpose planner, human network analysis, immersion VR counselor. Some of them maybe you have, maybe your organizations are a little bit more down that road. But again, another reason you should care is because HR will pass you by if you don't set yourself up for success as well as the rest of your company, right? So again, these are reasons why we should care. And the last reason why I think we should care is that, when the stars align, everything goes wonderful. Well, sometimes the stars misalign. And think about it. Think about the last few years in trying to build better organizations, what we've had to go through in terms of building a better experience, changes in workplace generations at a faster rate than ever before. How do we focus on employee wellness when they're being attacked at every level of wellness that's been happening? I've seen nothing like it in my career. How do we build more inclusive cultures with what's happening in our organizations and our communities around diversity and belonging? How do we build a better employee experience through business transformation and probably some of the most rapid change management we've seen in our organizations? And hey, by the way, let's do it all while we're trying to work remotely and have hybrid workplaces. So even though the stars have been misaligning, I actually want to talk about why we should care. Is I think the stars are aligning for HR. We have the biggest impact more than ever before in terms of influencing our organizations, right? And that's an exciting place to be. We always talked about seat at the table. We should have huge confidence with what happened over the last 2 years that we can make change. And there's a lot of change to be had. And that's really why I want to talk about today and dive into the 6 key strategies to improve the employee experience in 2023, but really future-proof HR, future-proof your organization. So we'll dive into those items right now. First things first. Companies need to be more agile. HR needs to be more agile. By the way, if you're not liking the music references yet, you're gonna have to get used to them. A lot of them are coming. Hopefully you can tell me in the chat who, what this is in terms of the reference and where this image is from. But when I talk about HR agility, it means the ability and the capability to move quickly, to be responsive, to be nimble, right? Proactively manage disruption, all the things that we have been doing and we're going to have to continue to do as our workplaces change. And if I didn't see anything in the chat yet, but it's from Back to the Future. But what's interesting is we've been living in the past from an HR and people practice perspective in many, many cases, in a lot of organizations I see out there. And I want to just identify a few stories to illustrate this. So first, everyone knows this company, right? The Ford Motor Company. Back in 1907, Henry Ford had an attrition rate of over 700%. I'm not misquoting, 700%. And he was wondering, well, what do I do to keep people building that Model T Ford car? What he did is he said, well, if people sit at that seat and build that car for over a year, we'll give them a gift. And really, that was the world's first years of service program, a reward program where people were recognized for being in seat for a certain period of time. Now, what's interesting about that story is that was in 1907. Almost 120 years later, people still use that as their predominant way to reward and recognize their employees. Haven't changed in over a century. Think about performance management. GE popularized this whole concept back in the 60s, even though it was created back in 1910, right? That whole, here's your 3-point rating to define everything, your compensation, your promotions, etc. And companies still do it as their predominant way to manage performance in their company. Talk about things like employee listening. Right? How many people here have done an annual engagement survey or one every 5 years? Actually created in the 1920s by the US government. And companies still today use that as the predominant way to hear employee feedback in a more formal way, in a more confidential way. And the reason why I bring up these stories is that in those 3 instances that we've all experienced in some capacity, we all still do them, right? We're not changing our practices. We're doing them very infrequently. We're not being agile. And I always like to joke, we still do it, even though it's as painful as listening to the Fergie's rendition of the national anthem. Now, if you've heard this, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't heard it, listen to it if you want to have a fun afternoon. Now, I tell these stories because back to that concept in the spirit of agility, the reality is this is what success looks like in our careers and in our organizations, and our approaches have to change, right? We can't get to success on our employees and our companies unless there's more agility in how we actually do things, how we listen to employees, how we recognize their efforts, how we have better employee success conversations, you name it, basically all the aspects of HR. And the reality is our employees don't work in years. Our practices from an HR perspective shouldn't be in years, right? So it's important to have agility in our processes at the end of the day. And I just use the example of employee surveys, right? And I'll use this as an example moving forward. But in the world of relating to more agility that we need in our company, this is just an example from Gartner research done a little while ago on the blue line, or the dark blue line talks about the annual employee survey, and the light blue line talks about other ways to hear employee feedback. Back in 2018, this world was colliding. So companies are starting to figure out that what they used to do for decades, for years, in some cases for a century, isn't matching what we need to be doing from an agility perspective to navigate through our businesses. Now, one part I want to make on this one in the agility concept is it's not just about frequency. The way companies are changing their approaches when it comes to something like listening to employee feedback is also, it's more than measurement. What I talk about is not just frequency of measuring things like engagement or diversity, equity, inclusion, or sentiment around employee experiences. It's about diagnostic feedback. Right? The true definition of agility is frequency combined with diagnostic understanding of what's working in your organization and what isn't, and then making change. And not doing that once a year, right? There's no accountability for any of your leaders or your teams to do something different if you're going to check in a year later or make changes on an annual basis at the end of the day. And I always bring up this concept of agility. Jonathan has heard that Fergie's version, I just noticed. So you know what I'm talking about. But the reason why I bring up agility is many people in HR don't even know where this concept of agility came from. When I ask them in sessions like this, not many people know, but where it came from is it came from the concept of how companies build technology. So to give you a little color, when companies used to build technology, it was called the waterfall method. Let's come up with all the requirements and the research. Let's develop the platform. Let's invest all the time and energy and put it out into market. And sometimes that was a year or 2 years of work. And then it got to market and no one liked it. And we spent time, effort, money to put something in that no one used or no one had a need for. So what happened is this new concept, right, came up, which was called agility, where they created technology in 3 months and threw it out there and found out what worked and what didn't. Then you reiterate on that to create a second version of that platform, and third and fourth. And what happened is you de-risked everything you were trying to do from building a technology. And if it did fail, it failed 3 months early, not 2 years down the road. You saved a lot of time and dollars. So this concept of agility is the way we need to run our organizations. But if we're not agile and we're doing things in annual practices, like all the examples I just mentioned, it's really not going to work in today's workforce. So again, this is just one example of how I have to rethink all of our HR and people practices to reflect that modern employee and modern workplace. But again, there's many other ones as well. So one of the things I like to share is that my advice on how to get onto the right mindset of being agile is think about your consumer principles versus your employee principles. So what are your organizations doing to support your customers, just like we talked about that evolution at the beginning, that they could be doing to support their employees? Because remember, consumers are humans. Employees were humans way before they were employees, right? Their needs and expectations change, and our HR practices have to change with it. Now, what's interesting is I love this from another thing from Gartner that showed here's all the things we do from our customer relationship systems, customer engagement. And this is more from a technology perspective, personalized contextual marketing to a customer directly. How do we listen to our customers, understand their sentiment, loyalty programs to make them coming back for more service and support our customers so they never leave us? Well, why aren't we using those exact same principles on our talent side, right? How do we personalize it for them? How do we listen what their needs? How do we understand what they need in terms of sentiment analysis, recognize, reward them, service and support employees so they never leave? And what's interesting in this study is they showed that companies spend 11 times more on their consumer systems than they do on their employee systems. And I don't know about you, but you don't get customers or satisfaction unless you have the employees building your products or providing your services. So if you are going through budget times now, which I'm sure a lot of you are, it might be a good understanding and a good question to see, well, what are we investing in our employee systems and technology and people and resources compared to what we're doing for our customers and our prospects and other things as well? So that was the first major trend. Companies are realizing that if they're not getting more agile, they're not going to be able to compete when it comes to retaining, inspiring talent at the end of the day. So that was the first one. The second major pillar for HR to build a great employee experience and future-proof their company is that you have to get digital now, not tomorrow. Right? I mean, you kind of led to that with the last slide, but you need to have technology to compete in this market as an employer and as a business. And in other words, right, what is your HR tech strategy? What's your strategy? What's your HR tech budget? What's your 3-year plan, your 5-year plan? Have we given thought to what that's going to look like? Because those are major investments in change management in an organization that have to be made. I read this the other day. It's an automated world and HR is just living in it. And we shouldn't be living in it. We should be driving it. Right? All the things I talked about of our stars misaligning, this is our moment in HR, right? It's a huge opportunity to leverage technology, not even opportunity, but a need to create that better employee experience for everything that's changing around us. Now, what's interesting is I just talked about how this is so important for creating a better employee experience, but the reality is it's going to make all of us better as HR executives. It'll automate things so that you can provide value to your company in other ways, right? Versus having to send people manual information or data and those type of things. So how do you shift your energy to other things by leveraging technology to get there? Really good example, just quickly. I mean, I talked about 3 things earlier, like performance and recognition and rewards and employee listening. Technology can make all those things better. But one of the most recent ones I saw was what Walmart did with training and development. This is an example of what they call their VR wet wall. So every time you work at Walmart, you need to get trained on how you're going to manage the wet wall, right, where all the leafy vegetables are. And this is just one example where they used VR to cut their training time from 8 hours to 15 minutes. Like, that is astronomical. And the reason why I bring this up is, are you researching these type of technologies? Are you looking at what's out there? I mean, with Worktango, I personally work with over 1,000 organizations at the company, supporting them with technology to drive what matters to them. So if we're not looking at technology to enable us to be successful, enable us to be agile, it's going to be really tough to future-proof our organization. Now, what's interesting is that just, there's such hesitation for launching these products, and I get it, right? I get it. When you launch something from an HR perspective, it touches every employee. It's not like a leader of sales. They launch something, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, they pull it out and do something else. So there is a little more scrutiny and effort that goes into launching something. But in that spirit of agility, trial it. If it fails, who cares, right? That's being agile. You're trying something out there to build a better experience. And again, technology is just a good way to allow that agility to take hold. Now, the great thing about technology, and I kind of shoved 2 trends into one here, is that it's not just about speed and agility. It offers much more insights, right? Not data, but insights on what's happening in your organization. And technology allows this not to happen, right? We all get our data in Excel spreadsheets. We send it to our do-it-yourself Excel wizard on our team or in another department. And then we figure out how to use that data. And then months go by and the data's stale. And we've all been there. Actually, what's interesting is my personal story of how I got into the world of HR is that I actually studied marketing. I studied in university, studied in school, got into my career, and went to go sit in client offices, all over Canada and the US. And I sat there a couple of years after graduation and looked around, and everyone was miserable at work. And I was thinking back to all of my studies. I'm like, wow, first off, I studied concepts of consumer behavior and why people buy products and tie themselves to brands. But reality is, I'm like, who cares? Why are people motivated at work and not at work? And that shifted my trajectory in my career. But the big thing was that I'm a big data nerd. I'm like, we have so much data on our customers. Why don't we have data on our employees? Right? And that, again, I think that was a huge opportunity in what's happening in this shift in the workplace and HR technology and how we build better experiences for our employees, that I've seen kind of infusing itself into this world, just like the evolution happened that I mentioned earlier. Now, I bring up this concept of technology to enable insights, but it's not just about data. Where technology really has a play is more about action, right? You push the data that you want or the insights to the right people, where they can pull it from you on demand. Right? Data at the end of the day is about enablement, right? How do you push and pull the data to the right people at the right time, which you can really only do with technology, right? And again, I hope you're all loving the music references. They're coming fast and furious, and I don't think they're going to stop much. But hopefully you're all into that. But the point I want to make is that getting data people isn't enough. what you do with that data, leveraging technology is really critical. So for example, just giving leaders data from their engagement survey, for example, in real time, and not having HR be that filter, that's a big enablement tool. But technology can start nudging your leaders and recommending learnings, recommending actions specific to their team to enable them to be successful. So again, I'm just leveraging examples of how technology in some cases are supporting a lot of agility in sense that insights and the data that you need to be successful, but also in how you drive action in organizations as well. My last point about this topic is that technology is an amazing thing. So if Auto-Tune can give T-Pain a career, think what technology can do about building a great employee experience, helping your employees thrive, your HR teams thrive. And by the way, I have nothing against T-Pain. I just saw this image and thought it worked based on what I was trying to do here with the music analogies. So that's number 2 from a trend perspective. The third trend, reskilling and upskilling must be a part of your talent strategy. Think about it, right? As technology evolves and assumes more workplace tasks, not only HR, but I think companies have discovered that many employees in our company are not equipped, right? Not equipped to handle 21st century responsibilities, programming robots, stocking shelves, managing inventory. That's all leveraging technology in a way that we didn't have technology before. And to succeed in that digital era, HR needs to transform the whole learning and work experience, right? Our new reality is this. This concept of upskilling our workplace isn't a trend, it's a survival strategy. The pandemic, it did a lot of things, but it underscored the importance of a skills-based talent model, right? We're gonna need that skills-based and agile work design in building the workforce for the future for organizations. I always joke that there's always gonna be a blockbuster in our world that didn't change, didn't adjust, and will no longer be here. And the reality is there's a significant supply and demand gap in the skills and the workers. And this has highlighted the fact that companies, mine, yours, we must ensure that our own sustainability is based on upskilling those individuals, and again, helping our companies continue to be competitive. So that being said, I think this is something that's important in general and was important in COVID, but it's especially important with an uncertain economy, right? We don't know what's happening coming up from the future. And again, it's going to be even harder to retain, find talent, and we're going to need to upskill that talent at the end of the day. So, I think when we think about the stars aligning, let's add economic uncertainty to that world as well. And I could spend all day sharing data. I won't, but these are just some examples from that study that showed when there's changes that companies are taking to close skill gaps. This is between 2019 and last year. Building skills is the major component where companies are spending their effort. More than redeploying, more than hiring, more than releasing people, more than contracting. This is where you're going to see sustainable success from the future of your organization and your people at the end of the day. But again, it has to be part of your talent strategy. So my overall advice on this is as we get into 2023, protect your learning budgets at all costs or regret it later. And that was a very, very specific tone in that McKinsey study I was mentioning, which I think is really important as we think about planning for 2023 and beyond. Now, last thing I'll say on this, if you need any motivation, I'll go back to this slide. Right? Think about it, right? In our own world, our own roles, we're gonna have to upskill ourselves. A lot of things on the right there that we may not all be qualified to do. How are we making sure us and the rest of our staff are qualified for our next jobs? Now, no matter what path you go down, just some advice. First, make learning available for everyone wherever possible. Accommodate different learning styles. Make sure it's very, very inclusive. How do you bring that to life? Recognize and reward upskilling efforts, whether it's people taking it on their own volition or you providing those opportunities. But the main point I want to make is you need a robust L&D strategy, which focuses on upskilling and basically protecting your people and your business at the end of the day. So that was the third major trend. Halfway there. Fourth major trend and 2023 strategy, again, not just for 2023, but to future-proof your company, build a fantastic employee experience is, at the end of the day, you need a DEI strategy, period. Now, I'm not going to spend way too much time on the why that you need a DEI strategy. Again, I could spend an hour showing data on that, but I want to take a bit of a different approach and say, I think that there's two ways that companies can approach this rationale. The first is the business case for diversity, right? There is a plethora of business case studies on how does diversity improve productivity, innovation, sales, you name it. But a lot of the conversations that are being had out there is, are you doing it for your business or are you doing it for the right side? Is it the right thing to do to build a more inclusive culture where people bring their full selves to work, where there's a sense of belonging? And I think companies need to start with thinking whether they should be doing the right thing or should they be doing it for a business case. Because the reality is, in my opinion, this obsession with business case isn't working. The reason why I say it isn't working is there was a recent study that was published on Fast Company, and it looked at a number of graduates that finished school and said, here, go take a look at these Fortune 500 companies and tell us which ones you want to work with, simply from an inclusion and belonging perspective. 41%, they didn't want to work for any of them. Why? They didn't think the company was genuine. All the data around why we're building a more diverse culture was self-serving versus genuine. It was all about it's going to build profitability and success, but it had nothing to do with building a great culture. So no matter what approach you take, I think it's good to look at both lenses when it comes to that DEI strategy. And the point I wanted to make in terms of a DEI strategy is that representation cannot be your DEI strategy. Your hiring practices, your targets on different representation from a demographic perspective, that is not enough. And many of you aren't even there yet. If you are, I commend you. But you need more. You need to understand sentiment around inclusion, right? There has to be practices on making this part of the fabric of your organization. It has to be a strategy and not simply just a program. And again, one of the things that I love sharing, and again, I'm obviously a little biased working with Worktango, but we place this right into our values in our organization. We encourage everyone to be 1,000% you. Right? How do you build DE&I into the fabric of your organization, into the DNA? And I find it's a really great way to relook at your values and find out if it should be there versus anywhere else. Now, there's a lot you can do from a DEI strategy perspective. I'm not going to go through all the things that you could be doing from that perspective, but holistically is a major strategy. When we think about future-proofing our organization and our HR departments and building a great employee experience, that's definitely on that list. That's number 4. 5th, if you strip everything away from the music perspective and you have this group Pentatonix that does a cappella, it is amazing. It is fantastic. If you haven't listened to it, definitely do it. But if you strip everything away from our businesses and our employees, they're humans, right? I mentioned it before. They were humans before they were employees. So building a human-first culture is a major trend that organizations are really trying to instill into their strategies moving forward. And a good way to think about that is that when you think about how you approach employees in your organization, emotional intelligence is trumping things like intelligence quotients, right? EQ is way more important than IQ. And some say during uncertain times and pandemic and uncertainties with the economy, I say it's always been the case. Because look at it from the lens of your employees. I've never seen this level of influence on an employee's wellness at all levels. I've never seen it like this before, where people are being attacked at a mental wellness perspective, physical, social, financial, you name it. So at the end of the day, I think a big part of building empathetic cultures and building a human-first culture is really starting to make sure that you're building empathetic leaders. How do you relate and understand what employees are going through? How do you understand concepts of psychological safety? How do you make sure leaders focus on well-being, don't just focus on engagement? I'm talking about this because I've seen influence and I've seen impact in organizations. But every time I tell these stories, people look like Angela on the left there and their eyes roll. I'm like, really? You're talking about empathy? Like, we have to build empathetic places? And this isn't just fluffy data, right? People will not stay at your organization. You will not retain them, right? They won't help you in these tough times if you don't build empathetic workplaces, right? There's a lot of data to share it. Now, I'm going to probably do the biggest faux pas in an HR podcast or webinar, and that's going to be show you this. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, stick with me for a moment. Some people are maybe rolling their eyes as well. But remember, this is the theory of human motivation, right? Not employees, but human motivation. And if you actually translate what's out there in terms of how that relates to people's employee experiences, when we get past safety, right? Security of having a job, comp, and benefits, it's not until we get past that we get into modern recognition for belonging and self-esteem. We get to career development for self-actualization. And the reason why I'm talking about this is if we just focus on the role people are doing and the pay that they make, it's not going to be successful. We have to start getting into other levels of empathy and building human first cultures, because people want purpose more than they want a job these days. Now, what's interesting is I always ask this. It's hard to do it when people aren't live, but I ask people who's taken a job for less money in their career or someone really close to them. And typically 80 to 90% of people's hands go up. And they go up because the base isn't enough. We have to offer people a better experience than just a job at the end of the day. And that does relate to building human first cultures. We spend most of our waking time at work, right? How can we build an experience where, again, not only is it inclusive, as mentioned earlier, imagine going to work every day wondering, that you thinking that you don't belong. But we also have to make sure it's human first and building empathetic cultures as well. Now, if you don't like Maslow at all, I'll tell you that he was wrong. There were other things that were important, like Wi-Fi and battery and toilet paper and other things that are changing. So, if you didn't like Maslow, maybe you'll like me changing his approach a bit. Now, the reality is, and the reason why I think this is a big structure and focus from a strategy perspective in this year, more than most years, is this is getting harder, right? How do you do this when you're remote or hybrid? How do you build human first cultures and connection when you don't have people, in the same place anymore? So it gets a lot harder. That's why companies have to be really intentional with understanding what they're doing to build this type of environment that people want to be in. I'll just share a quick story. I saw a company present what they have done to support employee wellness and really a human first culture called Shiny Docs. And they have backgrounds for their Zoom calls that represent how people feel. Right? If it's red, hey, I'm not doing well. If it's green, hey, I'm doing okay. If I'm yellow, I'm borderline. If it's red, don't ask me about it. But it's allowing people to show up at work in certain ways and building an environment and space where you're being empathetic that people have other things happening in their lives, especially with a lot of the uncertainty with remote work and what's happening over the last couple of years. Now, last point I'll make on this point before getting off the soapbox of building human first cultures is you have to figure out how to build trust in your organization, period. I'm offended at how many companies have implemented employee monitoring software, and stocks of those companies shot up after the pandemic. But I always like to do this little exercise to kind of frame us in the right way. So if you actually, hopefully you all have a calculator beside you or on your phone or on your computer. But I love this exercise of actually getting that calculator and typing how many employees you have in your organization. Right? So let's say you have 100. Type that in. Now, multiply the number you just put into that calculator by 35,000. So if you're just pulling up your calculator now, number of employees times 35,000. And press equal, and you're going to see something on your screen. Now, what you're seeing actually represents the number of decisions that your employees make every single day. 35,000 is how many decisions human beings make every single day. So if you had 100 employees, if they make 3.5 million decisions. And if you have a lack of autonomy, a lack of trust, not only is it a huge engagement killer, but it doesn't build the great experience and success of your company moving forward. And I'll get to it in a bit why that's important using data. But you have to build a culture of trust, a culture of confidence in your company to actually start setting you up for success in terms of what happens in the future. One of my favorite things I've read recently was that you're either building trust or you're eroding it. There's no in between. Right? If you're not actually doing something to build it, then you're just eroding it. So that you have to be always thinking and being intentional on improving this trust level in your organization. So this last point I want to make on this, if you really want to build a human first culture, how do you focus on reinforcing the purpose and values in your company? Right? Are you amplifying this with recognition strategies? Do you have accountability? Right? Do we track if employees think leaders are living our values in our organization? Right? What are you doing to reinforce this? And the reason why I'm showing this is that I love this McKinsey image and article, but they talk about 9 imperatives to help HR leaders ready their organization for the future. You can look at the light blues of how we grow and how we operate, but it's really in the middle there of who we are. What is your organization's purpose and how you amplify it? What is the values in your organization? What's the culture? People don't want to work for a company. They want to work with a company at the end of the day. And if you want to set yourself up for success, these conversations and these strategies have to be built in, if they're not being built in already in terms of how we focus on building a great workplace. I always like to say, it's not just your strategies and at a very, very high level, but being very tactical. When I founded WorkTango, we created our passion statement, right, to improve work lives. And I mentioned why, we spend a lot of our waking time at work. But even things like hiring practices, right? If people's eyes don't light up for the passion that we're in, we're not going to hire you, right? And the idea here is how do you start building this into the fabric of everything you do to build the culture that you want to build, right? It's that center part of that image in the last slide that really need to focus on before you think of all the functional ways of how you're going to do things or the what you're going to do. It's really about why. So that's the fifth one. Sixth and last one. And I think one of the most critical ways you can see the most leverage in organizations is you need to leverage what I call your secret weapons, which are your managers. I feel bad for managers in organizations. They are the face of antiquated HR practices. They are, right? Hey, make sure you have this conversation once a year and rate people a 1 out of 3. Here's data from an employee survey we did 3 months ago. We're not going to check in for another year to see the impact or influence of that, but that's the practice we're sending you on. Again, they're the face of antiquated practices that we put in front of them. Now, I always love putting this slide up here because a lot of people's eyes kind of perplexed and they're wondering what's on there, and you think this isn't English, and you're right, it's not English. These are actually 2 Latin root words for the Italian word maneggiare. And the English word manage comes from that, right? Maneggiare is the Latin word, manage is what it means. But what's interesting is manus means hand, and aggere means to act. So the literal meaning of manage is using something with your hands like you're using a tool. And I like telling this definition because I ask people right after is, think about it, are your managers tool, right? Are they great tools that help you drive success of your organization, the success of your employees, or are they the bad tool? Right? I looked up the definition of bad tool and it says a fool that is characterized by low intelligence and low self-esteem, right? Ouch. But that's a stigma our leaders have, right? They have this bad persona in our organizations, but I believe that HR and our companies are not doing enough to enable them to be successful. And if you don't believe a meme like this, believe Google, right? I typed in my manager into Google and this is what came up. Toxic, hates me, doesn't like me. I'm Canadian, so maybe in French showed up for that. Ignores me, harassing me, incompetent, was rude to me. I don't know what the Korean show is, but I got to check that out. And then what really hit me is at the bottom right, it said report inappropriate predictions. These are all inappropriate. I can't believe this is what people search up, or this is the stigma of managers in an organization. So I bring up this story in terms of leaders being your biggest leverage point is because when you think about your strategies for next year, how do you enable them with the tools and not create tools at the end of the day? How do you push down the strategy and responsibility of building a great experience to support leaders and managers as well? Right? Leaders are employees, right? Managers are employees. They have the same needs and desires and drives than every other employer in our organization has, but sometimes we forget about them. So when you think about that 2023 strategy, how do you build a foundation where they can be successful? Because they have so much leverage in terms of building a great workplace for your employees and everyone beyond. And I always love showing this to organizations, this next slide, and talks about, we have a business strategy, we have an HR strategy, and then we maybe have an employee experience strategy or add any other HR strategy at the bottom. But the reality is we should be looking at our organization that there's a business strategy and there's a people strategy. And every leader is accountable for making that a reality, whether you're an exec team, whether you're a senior leader, whether you're a low-level leader, whatever it is. And I always tell that story that you think about a machine, right? You have all these cogs in the system of the machine making it go round and round. At one end, you have your corporate vision and success and what it looks like. On the other hand, you have what employees do every day, all the behaviors, things they build, the services they provide. But in the middle are leaders. They're the glue that connects those together. If they're not informed, if they're not enabled, and you remove them from the system, the whole system falls apart, right? So you really need to figure out, well, how do we enable our leaders in this whole process? So that being said, those were the 6 major strategies that companies are really focusing on. And I found putting into a lot of their plans as this year wraps up and they think about the future. So what I wanted to end off with was 2 things. One is, where could you start, and a bit of a framework, but also some mindsets to leave us with, and then leaving some time also for some questions if there are any. But in terms of where to start, I find a really good exercise, whether it's sitting down your HR team or your executive team. If it's an HR team of 1, maybe it's just self-reflecting and seeing where do we sit today. But when it comes to building an experience for our employees that are going to provide success in the future, again, for them, for you, for your company, I always like taking a look at some major pillars of what builds a great business, right? Communication and feedback, leadership, where we work, performance discussions, etc. These are just some examples. And ask ourselves, are we in the from bucket? Are we in the legacy and the history of what companies used to do? Back to those stories we told earlier. Or have we moved to a more traditional, a more modern way to do things? And I find if you're sitting on here and realizing we're more on the left than we are the right, you can have some honest conversations or honest self-reflection about where you're at, and just really builds a good conversation around what we can do differently based on these specific pillars. Now, to give you a real life, idea and template to work with, what I've seen work with a lot of organizations is that sitting your team down, or again, asking yourself, what's changing in your business? So if you want to build a fantastic employee experience, what's changing at this moment in time? Maybe it's remote work, inclusive cultures, wellness concerns, transformation, very thing specific to your business. But ask yourself, in the next, or at the current moment, are we doing anything differently about it? And these are the 6 things we talked about today. Are we becoming more agile in our approach, right? It's not just about frequency, but it's approach sometimes. Are we leveraging technology, or are we waiting for another time? Are we embracing building a more inclusive workplace? Is it a human-first culture in our decisions? Are we making decisions for the business and our shareholders and HR versus not our employees that make up the majority of our organization? Are we reskilling and upskilling them? Are we enabling and leveraging leaders? And when you ask yourself if we've done anything differently in those 6 buckets in the last 3, 4, 5 quarters, it puts you in a good mindset to understand there's room for improvement, and then having conversations around, okay, what do we want it to look like? How do we set the vision and then define what success looks like to get there? So I find just putting up these, even just this one slide in terms of what's possible and building the right conversations around it, you come up for air, you kind of get out of the business, and instead of working in the business, you start working on the business in terms of what you're trying to build from an HR and people perspective. So that being said, what I wanted to end off with is just some final mindsets to leave you all with. It's hard to make change, but at the end of the day, we have to come with the right mindset, the optimism that we can make a difference in our organization. So in talking to a lot of HR leaders, in my experience, these are things that bubble up to the top in those discussions. So first things first. It's an honest understanding and consideration that Rome wasn't built in a day. That being said, bricks are being laid every hour, every day, every week. Now, everything that you want to do in your organization can't be done in a year. So develop a strategy that has one major transformation this year, right? 1 or 2 major transformations in 2023 and 2024, right? And even with just some of those major transformations, 1 to 3, you'll see huge influence and impact in your organization in 2025 and beyond, right? We have to start thinking and acting now if we want to build, this wonderful, beautiful thing that people can enjoy in the future. So that's number 1. Second, mindset. I used to work with an organization that one of our values was this, and it wasn't research and development. It was actually rip off and duplicate. What are other companies doing out there? How can we understand them? How do we learn from them? How do we stand on the shoulders of giants and do things that other people have figured out? And it's not saying we're just stealing it and implementing it into our organization, but how do we find something that might work in our company, adjust it, and make sure that we use it? We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we're trying to build great employee experiences, every time we're trying to build better HR experiences, improve our company. Let's lean on what other people have done. And so often we forget about the networks out there. I sit in like 4 different HR groups that I learn everything every day. I'm like, oh, we should be doing that. And it's easier to implement or tap someone on the shoulder that's been through the process. So when you're thinking about doing something new or different, just remember someone's done it before. So how do you R&D it, right? How do you rip off and duplicate it? The other mindset to get into is that 6 months ago, this article came up on the news channels. Fashion house Chanel hires Indian-born Lena Nair as CEO. And what's interesting there is you read this whole article, and the one thing they leave out in here is that she actually used to be the CHRO, right? She became the CEO after the CHRO world. And my gosh, like if there's something that doesn't give me confidence as an HR leader, right, it's this. We should all have confidence in what happened over the last couple of years. What companies used to have is a 2-year transition plan and strategy to get remote. HR people did in literally 2 weeks. So we're not Tim Storms anymore, right? We're not Tim Storms that we talked about at the beginning of this discussion, right? We're one of the celebrities that are going to get a lot more fanfare. And what's interesting, we have to have that level of mindset that we can make change and we can influence, and we, kind of the sky's the limit from an HR perspective and an HR leadership perspective. Now, what's really cool is that I showed this slide a couple of times over the last kind of 6 months. Just when I saw it, it really hit me they talked about everything else, the fact that this person was an HR leader. And literally less than a week ago, on November 2nd, this came from Fortune. Move over CFOs is new competition for the CEO title. Right? Boards are tapping HR executives for CEO as a demand for talent innovation source. So we should definitely have that confidence. The seat at the table that was not within reach, I don't think is a reality anymore. If it's like that in your business, how do we start building better workplaces in order for us to get there? And the last mindset I want to leave with is this. Remember when I showed this, the stars aligning? I believe from an HR perspective, this is our moment, right? We can build the employee experience that we always wanted, given all the things that are happening, right? What a perfect opportunity for change, given everything that's happening around us, right? And build a competitive advantage when it comes to retaining and inspiring talent. Now, one thing I didn't mention is my last music reference is that this is actually an image from a Drake song. I'm in Toronto, so I had to bring up Drake. That was my last kind of reference. But the reality is that the stars are there. They're aligning for us in HR. But we have to take action and build strategies and be really thoughtful for how we're going to be able to make change in our organizations. And hopefully the 6 strategies, some of these ideas and stories and concepts, you can infuse into your current planning what you're trying to do to build a great organization in your world. So I lied. There was one more music reference. That's it for me today. I didn't make it as that musician, so this is the closest I get to people, rocking on stage with my fake guitar and my emoji there. But I just wanted to say appreciate everyone's time and effort to put this on from the Argyle's perspective. People for being here, and hopefully there's some really great discussions and conversations. And I'm just thankful for the time and effort to for the time to be able to speak to something I'm really, really, truly passionate about. And I love connecting. I'll throw my LinkedIn in the chat as well while we go through questions here. Happy to connect with anyone outside, but I appreciate everyone's time.
Thank you, Rob. It's a great presentation, and we'll now head over to audience Q&A. And audience members, you are welcome to still enter questions, and we'll address some of the ones that have come through. Okay, so our first one, you talked about recognition, but how should we think about an employee rewards strategy?
Oh, how much time you got? So if you think about some of those major strategies and trends I just mentioned, I think a lot of those need to be considered, right? So we talked about the example where, not even the example, but I live it every day. You see organizations where the predominant strategy for rewarding and recognizing employees is literally a years of service program. Right. Every 5 years, people get rewarded for what I say, literally breathing, like being in seat, not for performance, not for anything else, but for that. And if you look at the U.S. labor statistics back in January of 2022, the average tenure of employees in the U.S. is 3.8 years. So we're implementing programs that aren't working, aren't inspiring, and again, treats everyone the same way, whether they're top performers or not. So in the spirit of agility, right? Making recognition not an annual conversation, but making that part of the fabric of your company, right? In terms of peer-to-peer recognition, always on recognition, recognizing important values and behaviors and you want to see more, so that it's not just thanking people for getting coffee, it's specific to what's important in your company. So if you think about agility and then technology to make that really, really simple and easy, but also leverage the data from those types of recognition to define people decisions, like who are future leaders in the company if they're displaying those types of activities. Or are there different cross-functional recognitions that maybe if we have cross-functional teams, we put them together in building a new strategy in our organization? So I could spend all day and just do an hour session on that, but hopefully that gives you color into some of these trends, translate into a complete recognition and reward strategy. And last thing I'll say about it is when you think about economic uncertainty, people doing more with less when it comes to resources, recognition is an intrinsic motivator. So if you can combine recognition with extrinsic motivators like rewards, you could really have an influence on building a culture that you want at the end of the day. And what gets recognized gets repeated. So infusing that into a culture has huge impact. And I've seen that in my 20 years working with recognition in different capacities.
Thank you. So our next question, I feel we are agile, but doing a lot of things manually. Where would you suggest we start to begin modernizing our processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. one of the challenges with agility, and I think, reiterating a bit what I talked about here, is that technology just allows things to be done faster, right? I use the example of employee surveys, right? What used to be done in terms of getting feedback from employees, then sitting and doing manual reports, serving that report individually to every leader, and then doing it all over again. People thought that an annual process for doing an engagement survey, for example, was the most arduous task out there, and then it was so much effort, whereas technology can allow that to happen in real time. Now, the part about it, I think, where to the question in terms of what you suggest we do to start modernizing, again, I think implementing technology is part of that, but it also, I think the data is where you start leveraging the data to make better decisions at the end of the day, whatever those decisions are. Now, that all being said, that is not the be all and end all solution. Like, technology is an enabler, data is an enabler. You have to have a philosophy and a structure and a strategy of what you're trying to accomplish at the end of the day that I think supersedes all of that. But if you want to get more agile, I mean, we're in the world of whether it's in our businesses or as consumers, where technology is allowing that to happen in spades.
Thank you. Okay, our next question, regarding some of the data information you were sharing earlier, what are some of the other ways to gather employee data?
Good question. A lot of ways to gather employee data. So actually, it's funny. I just mentioned those 3 items in my stories there. Obviously, you can get employee feedback, whether that's through surveys or conversations or discussions internally, but a good way to understand, and again, not just measuring, but also diagnostic feedback, but also across the whole employee lifecycle. Like, it shouldn't just be about measuring engagement. It should be measuring people's onboarding experiences, their experiences on a diverse workplace, their experiences through change management with their leader, et cetera. So I think that's one way to get data. I did mention recognition. I think there's a lot of indicators from a data perspective of what recognition can tell us. I remember working with an organization and literally predicted their attrition to about 70% accuracy just on recognition data, right? Are people recognizing other people? That is, sharing that they're engaged versus not engaged. Are they being recognized at all? Right? Are they actually conducting the right behaviors? And some of the stories I told earlier around leveraging that data for leadership decisions, et cetera. But there's definitely data that can be collected there. The other thing too is, even when I talked about performance conversations, companies are really shifting from let's do an annual appraisal to get feedback on a more frequent basis, whether that's monthly or quarterly, to understand more data sets, to be able to make better people decisions, to define things like promotion and comp, or what they want to do from a future perspective. So even just those examples I'd mentioned, there's already opportunities to collect more data from that perspective. Now, I do a whole other talk and session on collecting data. And I think the best way I'll simplify it is that there's different ways that you can get data. One is explicitly asking, right? You're soliciting feedback, but there's unsolicited data that you can get for employees as well. And what apps are they using on their phone? Not because you want to monitor them, but to understand what business systems are working or not working. Some use location tracking to understand if you have drivers in the field, or people working at home versus not home, and are they more productive? Now, some companies are literally listening to Slack messages and email to try to find sentiment and themes using that speech kind of analysis and natural language processing to see what are people talking about. But again, they're not asking them that; they're getting unsolicited feedback. So there's a number of data points and ways, and I'd love to connect. I sent my LinkedIn to share you that. I have a 1-page matrix of all the data sets you can collect. Hopefully, that gives you a little bit of color for whoever asked that question.
Thank you so much. So we have about a minute. If you want to go, just express some final thoughts on how do you think efforts to improve employee experience are going to evolve over the next couple of years? What's coming up?
Good question. I think some of the companies that are going down this journey now are realizing that a lot of that value is at the decision-making stage for executives, for HR, for leaders, as I mentioned. I think where it's going to go, though, is that level of data to build a great experience is going to sit into the hands of the employees, right? Here's my journey. Here's how I can influence it. Here's how my sentiment is versus the rest of the company. Here's how my trajectory is versus not only my organization, but other organizations out there. So I think that concept of the employee profile is going to be data that is really going to change the way that we approach these types of experiences. But a lot of the ownership is also going to be on employees versus today, they're pretty limited in the data they have available. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen tomorrow. I think there's a lot of effort and technology and norms and things that will be built into companies as we evolutionize our organizations. But if I were to think about what does the future hold, I think everything we're talking about here is employees are going to have a much bigger stake into what that's going to look and feel like.
Thank you, Rob. Well, we've come to the end of our time. It was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. We want to thank everyone else for joining us today for this webinar. And thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Rob, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Take care. See ya.